The sun hung low, casting its golden light over a village nestled in the heart of the land. The village lay shrouded in the shadows of towering mountains, their jagged peaks piercing the sky like the outstretched fingers of ancient ancestors. Beneath these mountains, the village breathed life, its rhythm guided by the deep beats of nature. The people lived in harmony with the land, their every movement tied to the cycles of the seasons, the rising and falling of crops, and the whispers of the spirits who dwelled within the sacred forest. The elders often gathered by the great tree of wisdom, where they would speak of the great ancestors who walked the earth before them. Stories of these wise men and women filled the air like the gentle rustle of leaves, each word carrying the weight of years, each tale a testament to the struggles of those who came before. But now, beneath the peaceful hum of tradition, something new had begun to stir. The land, once ruled by the old ways, was feeling the weight of something far greater than any had imagined. Change. The distant winds brought whispers of outsiders, of new technologies that promised to transform the world. Outside their village, the elders spoke in hushed tones, their words heavy with unease. "Change is coming," the elder Nana said, his voice thick with wisdom. "It is the law of nature, like the turning of the seasons. But the world outside grows louder, and we must listen, even if we do not understand." As the winds of change began to rustle through the leaves of the ancient forest, the village could not remain untouched. The sacred rhythms of old began to tremble in the face of this new power. The day Zuri returned, the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. Zuri, the lost princess, the girl who had once been cast aside, now stood in the place where the shadows of her exile had once been. Her return was a mystery, like a storm cloud that had been absent for years, suddenly returning with the promise of rain. She was no longer the child who had been banished. Now, she was a woman who carried with her the weight of her fathers. Death, the pain of betrayal, and the prophecy of her return. A prophecy that spoke of her restoring balance, of reclaiming the throne that had been stolen from her. Her eyes glimmered with something fierce, something deeper than the hurt she had endured. There was a power in her now, a fire born from the ashes of her past. She stepped into the village, and Essie, her childhood friend, saw her first. The years had changed Zuri, but there was something unshakable about her. Something that made Essie's heart ache with both joy and sorrow. "Essie!" Zuri's voice was a soft, familiar melody. Essie stood still, her heart pounding. The girl she had once known was now a stranger, a queen in waiting, but one who would never forget her past. She had heard the stories, whispered by the elders, of Zuri's curse, the belief that she had caused her father's death. "You have returned," Essie said softly, her words carrying the weight of years and unspoken truths. "But the village is not the same. The old ways are changing." Zuri's eyes darkened as she looked around the village. Kofi, her cousin, ruled. Now, a man born of ambition and jealousy, a man who saw her return as a threat to everything he had worked for. Kofi had long awaited his chance to claim the throne, believing the throne was his by birthright. He had convinced the village that Zuri was the cause of their misfortunes, her very existence a curse on their land. In his heart, he believed the throne belonged to him, and so he had spun stories to the elders, crafting a web of lies so thick that even the ancestors' whispers had begun to falter. But Zuri was not the same girl who had once been banished. She carried the knowledge of her bloodline, and she carried the wisdom of the spirits. She could feel the weight of the ancient prophecy calling her back to the throne. Zuri sat by the sacred fire one night, the flames dancing in the darkness. She had gathered the elders, for the time had come to speak of the truth that had been buried beneath Kofi's lies. "I am no curse," she said, her voice strong, unwavering. "I return to restore balance. I return to honor my father's legacy and to reclaim what is rightfully mine." The elders listened, some with doubt in their eyes, others with fear in their hearts. "But your father's death?" one elder began, his voice trembling. Zuri cut him off. "My father was not killed by me. The one who feared the throne is here among us, disguised in the guise of a man who would rule." The village held its breath, as Zuri's words hung in the air, as thick as the night itself. The battle for the throne was no longer a battle of strength, but a battle of truth. Zuri, now armed with the knowledge of Kofi's treachery, faced her cousin in the village square. The wind howled, as if the spirits themselves were watching. "Why?" Zuri asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "Why betray your own blood?" Kofi, his face twisted with envy and rage, sneered. "I feared you. You were the one who would take everything from me. Your return, it threatens everything I have worked for." Zuri stepped forward, eyes burning with the fire of justice. "You took my father's life, but you will not take this village. The spirits will not allow it." The storm began to stir, and the spirit of the forest, an ancient force, both revered and feared, rose in the winds. The villagers could hear the ancestors' voices, deep and powerful, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. "The truth must be known," the spirit's voice thundered through the skies, like a bolt of lightning splitting the heavens. "Kofi's greed has clouded the path. The village must choose, live in the past or move forward." The storm raged as Kofi's heart sank, for the truth was out now, and the forest had spoken. Zuri, standing firm, reached out to the ancestors. She knew her path. She would not seek revenge, for that would only poison her soul. She would instead seek forgiveness, for herself, for her cousin, and for the village that had been divided. Days later, Zuri stood before the elders once more, this time crowned not with a golden diadem, but with the wisdom of the land and the strength of the ancestors. "I will lead with the wisdom of the old ways, but I will also listen to the winds of change," she said. "We will walk forward together in balance with the earth, the ancestors, and each other." And so, the village began to heal. The elders returned. To their wisdom, the youth embraced the future, and Kofi, humbled, was given a chance to redeem himself. Zuri's reign marked the dawn of a new era, one that honored the past and embraced the future. The village prospered, the spirit of the forest watching over them, and the earth breathed a sigh of relief as the people found their balance once more. In the end, it was not the crown that gave Zuri power. It was her heart. True power lies, not in force, but in wisdom, in the ability to reconcile the past with the present, to walk the path of justice and truth, and to lead with compassion. And so, the village lived on. The story of Zuri passed down through the generations, a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the strength of the human spirit. The evening sky hung heavy with clouds, as though the heavens themselves felt the tension in the air. Zuri had returned. Under the cover of night, like a shadow rising from the past, she stepped into the village that had once been her home, the village that had cast her aside, believing her to be a curse. The tall grasses rustled in the wind, and the ancient trees whispered the stories of old, the stories of rulers and betrayals, of fate and redemption. Her return was a mystery, a riddle wrapped in the layers of time. Zuri walked silently, the rhythm of her footsteps seeming to echo through the hearts of the villagers, stirring long-forgotten memories. The villagers had heard whispers of her arrival, but now that she was here, the sense of unease grew, spreading like a storm cloud. At the village square, Essie stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She knew this moment was coming, yet it still felt like the ground beneath her shifted with uncertainty. Her childhood friend, the girl she once laughed with under the sacred trees, was now a woman who had returned with the weight of prophecy on her shoulders. "Zuri," Essie whispered, her voice barely audible. But Zuri did not hear her. her eyes focused. Ahead, as the familiar yet foreign village seemed to close in around her, the elders, once her father's most trusted advisors, sat in a circle by the sacred fire. Their eyes were clouded with doubt, and their voices carried the scent of hesitation. "She has returned," Nana, the oldest of the elders, said slowly, his words heavy with the weight of years. "The child of prophecy. But what of her heart? What of her soul?" One elder, Obi, leaned forward, his eyes sharp as he spoke. "We must not forget why she was cast out, the curse she brought upon her father, the bloodshed." His words were not meant for Zuri, but for the others in the circle, to remind them of the pain that followed her birth. Zuri stood still, feeling the eyes of the village upon her, their suspicion a weight she had carried for years. The fear of the unknown clouded their hearts. As the moonlight bathed the village, the elders gathered to speak of their unease. Kofi, Zuri's cousin, sat in his newly claimed throne in the heart of the village, his fingers tracing the carved armrests. His eyes flicked to the horizon as Zuri's presence began to stir the winds. He was fearful, not of Zuri herself, but of what her return might bring. "I should have known," Kofi muttered to himself, clenching his fists. "She returns to undo all that I have built. This village is mine, and no ghost from the past shall rise to take it from me." His envy burned like a slow fire in his chest. Over the years, he had carefully crafted his rule, feeding lies to the elders, building fear into their hearts. The villagers who still believed in the old ways clung to his side, for Kofi represented the stability they feared losing. Kofi moved swiftly, his words like poisoned arrows aimed at the heart of Zuri's return. As he approached the gathered villagers, his voice boomed with authority. "Zuri is a curse. She is the shadow of death that follows us wherever we go." Kofi's words rang out, dripping with the venom of betrayal. "I have seen it with my own eyes, the misfortune she brings. The death of her father is no accident. She is not our queen. She is a threat, a danger to us all." The villagers shuddered, unsure of whether to believe him or to listen to the whispers of old magic that spoke of Zuri's destiny. Isi looked on, torn. She could feel the pressure growing around her like the tightening of a rope, and the old ways, the ancient rituals and beliefs, seemed to push against the winds of change. "I believe she is not the curse you say," Essie finally said, her voice shaking as she stepped forward, "but a light in the darkness. She is not a shadow. She is the return of a long-lost hope." Kofi's gaze turned sharp. "You are a fool, Essie. She is your friend, yes, but she is no savior. She will bring nothing but chaos." Zuri moved silently among the villagers, their whispers following her like a heavy fog. Every step she took felt like walking on sacred ground. Memories of her father flooded her mind, the warmth of his voice, the feel of his hand in hers. Zuri was torn, for the journey home was not just about reclaiming the throne. It was about reclaiming her father's legacy, and her heart was heavy with the desire for revenge. But as she looked around the village, she knew that revenge would lead her down a path of destruction. Her father's death, was it truly her fault? Or had others conspired to erase the truth? The questions gnawed at her like insects, burrowing deep into her soul. Should she take the path of vengeance, like the stories her elders had warned her about? Or was there another way, one that would heal the village, one that would bring balance between the old ways and the changing tides? The trials were set to begin. The elders demanded that Zuri prove herself, not only as the rightful heir, but as a leader who could unite the village in a time of uncertainty. Zuri stood before the sacred fire, the elders' eyes locked on her every movement. "To prove yourself, you must face the trials of the land and spirit," Nana said, his voice like the wind rustling through the leaves of the sacred tree. "You will endure tests of strength, wisdom, and heart. Only then, If you are worthy, will you claim what is rightfully yours? Zuri's heart raced. These trials were not simply tests of physical endurance, but of her very soul. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The wind whispered to her, and for a brief second she felt the presence of her father's spirit beside her, as though the ancestors themselves had come to guide her. The trials began. Zuri was thrust into a series of challenges, each more grueling than the last. She scaled the rocky mountainside, her arms burning from the effort. She spent days in the forest, facing the spirits of the land, asking for their blessings and guidance. She was forced to confront the memories of her exile, the pain of betrayal, the loneliness, the haunting question of whether her father's death had been her fault. Each trial tested her inner strength, her ability to overcome the doubt and anger that threatened to consume her. As the days passed, Zuri became more determined, realizing that the greatest battle was not against Kofi or the villagers, but against her own demons. The tension in the village continued to grow. Kofi, ever the manipulator, spun tales of Zuri's evil. His influence over the villagers tightened like the claws of a lion, pulling them further away from her. Those who had once stood by her father now turned their eyes to the man who promised order and stability. And yet, Zuri's supporters began to gather. They saw in her a promise of renewal, a path that would lead them beyond the fear and doubt sown by Kofi. The village was torn in two, loyalties tested, hearts torn between the old ways and the new era that Zuri's return represented. As Zuri faced the final trial, she felt the presence of the spirit of the forest, an ancient force that had long protected the village. The spirit had been silent, watching the struggle unfold. But now it stirred. Its wisdom called to her. Zuri stood before the spirit's sacred shrine, offering her heart in silence, asking for the strength to lead, not with anger, but with peace. She was ready to face what was to come. Her journey, the trials of the land, the tests of her heart, and the struggle for her kingdom was not yet over. The future of her people would depend on her ability to reconcile the past and the present. Only then would she know whether she was truly the one meant to lead them. The sun was setting low over the village, painting the sky in hues of red and gold, but the land was heavy with tension. Zuri stood before the elders, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The final trials had begun, and each test was a step deeper into the heart of the village's ancient rituals, a trial not just of body, but of spirit. The ground beneath her feet felt both familiar and foreign, as though the very soil whispered the names of her ancestors. She was ready to prove herself, but her heart was conflicted. Zuri looked out over the gathering crowd, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity, fear, and hope. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the ghosts of her past pressing down on her shoulders. As she walked toward the first challenge, a sudden unease gripped her heart. Something felt off. Her steps faltered slightly. The elders spoke of these trials as rites of passage, but this felt like a test of more than just her strength. She was being pulled in all directions by the love of her ancestors and the anger of betrayal that burned in her veins. The trials began with a physical test, a climb up the steep, jagged cliffs of the mountain that loomed over the village. Zuri, sweat dripping from her brow, gripped the rocky surface with all her strength. The mountain was unyielding, much like the burdens she carried. Every handhold felt like it might slip from under her, every footstep threatened to send her falling into the abyss below. But Zuri was strong. She had been through worse than this. She pushed herself higher, each movement driven by the need to prove herself, to prove that the village had been wrong to cast her out, wrong to blame her for the death of her father. But as she neared the summit, she felt the tug of something, unseen, pulling her down. The rocks seemed to loosen, her grip slipping again and again, just enough to frustrate her, just enough to make her question herself. She tried to steady herself, but something was wrong. "Why can't I reach the top?" Zuri muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed off the rocks like the voice of the ancestors themselves. And then it struck her. Someone was sabotaging her efforts. She had climbed these mountains many times as a child, but today each step felt heavier. She looked over her shoulder, seeing the shadowy figures of the elders watching her from below. It was then that she realized the hidden hand of betrayal at work. Someone was delaying her progress, ensuring she faced each obstacle with greater difficulty than before. Kofi. As she descended, the echoes of Kofi's voice haunted her. She remembered the way he had always looked at her with suspicion, his eyes dark with jealousy, a jealousy that had now turned into something much worse: ambition. The village had always seen Kofi as the rightful heir, the one who would lead with strength. But Zuri was born of the same bloodline, and his power was not his alone. And now, as she faced her challenges, Kofi's treachery had spread its roots deep into the village. The moment she returned to the ground, Kofi was waiting, his smile cold and calculating. "You think you can reclaim what was never truly yours?" Kofi's words were sharp, like the edge of a blade. "You're nothing but a curse upon this land. You've always been weak, and you always will be." Zuri's heart beat faster, the old wounds of betrayal rising up again. But she fought the rage in her chest. This time, revenge would not consume her. The following day, as Zuri entered the great circle of elders to face the next challenge, her heart ached. She had already faced the mountain, but now she faced the test of wisdom, the trial of the spirit. The elders demanded that she speak the truth of her father's death, the event that had cast her out all those years ago. She knew that this trial was not just about proving herself, it was about confronting her past. The moment the elders' eyes fell on her, she felt a heavy weight on her chest. The faces of the villagers stared back at her with doubt and fear. She had to speak the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "Kofi," she began, her voice steady. "Kofi was the one who killed my father." Her words were like thunder, each syllable a weight that seemed to shake the earth itself. The silence that followed was deafening. The elders exchanged glances, murmurs rippling through the crowd. "How dare you say such things?" Kofi's voice was low, dangerous, but Zuri stood tall, the fire of justice burning in her eyes. She had already lived through the suffering. She could endure anything now because the truth had to be heard. As the confrontation reached its peak, a sudden storm rolled in, dark clouds swirling above the village. The spirit of the forest, long silent, began to stir. The winds howled, and the earth trembled beneath their feet. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the air like the rumble of the earth itself. The truth must be known. The spirit revealed itself to Zuri and the villagers, its presence both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It was ancient, older than time itself, and its voice echoed through the trees. "Kofi's greed has clouded the path," the spirit said, its voice reverberating through Zuri's very soul. "Your father did not die by your hand, but by Kofi's ambition. It was he who feared you and sought to cast you away, for he knew you were the true heir." The storm raged, the rain falling like a cleansing flood. The ancestral spirits demanded that the villagers acknowledge the truth. The villagers were stunned, the weight of the spirit's revelation pressing down on them. Kofi, caught in his lies, could not defend himself. The truth had been laid bare, and the village could no longer deny what had been hidden for so long. The final confrontation between Zuri and Kofi was inevitable. The village stood on the brink of destruction, torn between the old ways and the new, between the lies that had been fed to them and the truth that had now been revealed. "You have brought shame upon our land, Kofi," Zuri said, her voice strong, unshaken by his venomous words. "Your lies end today." Kofi, desperate to hold on to power, lunged at Zuri. But Zuri was not the frightened girl who had been exiled. She was the daughter of the earth, the rightful heir. She did not fight with rage, but with wisdom and justice. "I do not seek revenge," Zuri said, as she stood tall, her eyes unwavering. "I seek balance. The village must move forward, free from the weight of your deceit." Their battle was not one of force, it was one of will. Kofi fought to hold on to the past, while Zuri fought to build a future. And so, the villagers were forced to make a choice. The old ways, represented by Kofi, offered comfort, but at the cost of truth. Zuri, the beacon of change, offered hope. But that hope came with the uncertainty of the unknown. The village was divided. Some clung to Kofi's lies, others saw Zuri as their light, the one who would lead them into the future, embracing the wisdom of the past while opening the door to a new world. Zuri's heart was torn, but as the storm cleared, she knew what she had to do. She had fought for justice, but now she had to forgive. With a deep breath, she looked at Kofi, his face twisted with shame. "I forgive you," she said, her voice calm. "And I will lead with the wisdom of our ancestors and the love for my people." Zuri's transformation was complete. She was no longer the child seeking revenge. She was the wise leader, a queen not because of her birthright, but because she had the courage to forgive and lead with compassion. The village, now united, moved toward renewal. Zuri embraced the old ways, but also welcomed the change that would bring prosperity. The spirit of the forest watched over them, guiding them to a future where the balance between tradition and progress could be maintained. And in that moment, Zuri knew that her reign was not the end, but the beginning of a new dawn for the village, a dawn of unity, wisdom, and hope. The village stood in silence, the storm of conflict having passed, leaving behind a heavy calm. The air still carried the scent of rain, but now the earth seemed to breathe easier, as if the land itself had been cleansed. Zuri stood at the entrance of the village, gazing out at the people who had once turned their backs on her, now awaiting her to step into the role she had been born to claim. But Zuri did not step forward with arrogance nor with pride. She did not seek to rule with the power of the crown, for she knew that true leadership came not from the throne, but from the heart. As she walked into the village, the elders stepped aside, their eyes filled with both respect and trepidation. Zuri could feel the weight of the ancient wisdom in their gaze, but she also felt something else, something that was not there before. It was humility, for she had learned, through all her struggles and pain, that the power she held now was not to be used to control, but to guide. The people had followed Kofi because he had ruled with fear, but she would rule with wisdom, guiding them to restore what had been broken. "I stand before you, not as a queen who seeks to control," Zuri said, her voice steady and strong, "but as one who has learned from the land, from the ancestors, and from my own heart. I seek to serve this village, to restore peace, and to honor our traditions while embracing the future." The weight of the past was heavy on Kofi's shoulders. His pride had been shattered, his reign of fear and ambition reduced to dust. Standing before Zuri, he could feel the sting of shame wrapping around him like a cloak. Once he had been the village's leader, and now he was nothing more than a man whose ambitions had led him astray. Zuri, however, did not cast him out. Instead, she extended a hand of forgiveness, something he had not expected. "I forgive you, Kofi," Zuri said softly, her gaze unwavering. "You are my family, and your actions were born from fear. But now, we can rebuild the trust we once had, together." Kofi's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of shame and relief. He had wronged Zuri and the village, but in her mercy, he saw a chance for redemption. He kneeled before her, his voice thick with regret. "I was blind, Zuri. My ambition, consumed me. But now I see what true strength is, forgiveness and reconciliation. I am not fit to rule, but I will serve you. I will serve the people, and I will help heal the wounds I have caused." Zuri extended her hand, helping him to his feet. "We will heal, Kofi, together." As Zuri assumed her role as the leader of the village, the people began to feel the weight of her words. The elders, once divided, now gathered with the youth, and together they began to speak of the future they would build. Wisdom was shared, and new ideas began to flow. The villagers, once divided between the old ways and the new, found themselves united under Zuri's guidance. The change was not immediate, but it was steady, like the river that carves through stone, slowly. But surely the old wounds healed, and the bonds of family were restored. Zuri called for a great gathering, a coming together of the elders, the youth, and all the villagers who had once feared change. They sat beneath the sacred tree, where the roots reached deep into the earth, as if the very ground itself was blessing their union. Zuri stood before them, a woman not of titles, but of wisdom. "Let us honor the past," Zuri said, her voice carrying across the gathering. "But let us not be held captive by it. We must learn, grow, and unite. The ancestors guide us, but the future belongs to us, the children of this land." The spirit of the forest had watched over the village throughout the trials, and now, as Zuri began her reign, the spirit remained a constant, silent presence. It was not a force that could be seen, but a force that could be felt, like the wind, like the whispering leaves, like the heartbeat of the earth. Zuri knew that her leadership would not only be guided by the wisdom of the elders, but also by the spirits of the land who had seen the rise and fall of many before her. The spirits' presence was a reminder to all that true prosperity came from living in harmony with the land, with the ancestors, and with one another. The forest was not just a place, but a symbol of the delicate balance that must be maintained between humankind and nature. Zuri visited the sacred grove often, seeking wisdom from the trees, offering prayers of gratitude for the strength they had given her. She understood that balance was the key to both survival and growth, not just for the land, but for the people. As the village began to heal, so too did the spirit of renewal begin to take root. Zuri's reign was one of transformation, a transformation that embraced both the old ways and the promise of the future. She opened the doors to new ideas, to trade, and to alliances with neighboring villages. But she never forgot the core values that had sustained her people for generations. "Tradition is our foundation," Zuri said, "but progress is the wind that carries us forward. We must honor both." The village began to thrive, slowly at first, but with each passing day, the seeds of growth blossomed into a harvest of hope and prosperity. Zuri's leadership was not defined by the crown she wore, but by the wisdom and compassion she carried in her heart. As Zuri looked over the village, she could see the changes taking root. The once fractured community had come together, and the bonds of family, which had once been shattered by betrayal, were now stronger than ever. Kofi, now humbled, worked alongside Zuri, and together they sought to rebuild what had been lost. The legacy of Zuri's reign would not be defined by her power or her status, but by the impact she left on the hearts of her people. The wisdom of the elders had passed down to her, and she had woven it together with the dreams of the young. The village was no longer divided between the past and the future. It was united, whole. Zuri's final words echoed through the village, carried on the wind like the ancient songs of the ancestors. True leadership lies not in power, but in the heart. And we, as a people, are only as strong as the ties that bind us. The villagers, united under Zuri's guidance, knew that the future was bright. The cycle of life continued, but now it was guided by wisdom, love, and the strength of a community that had learned from the past and embraced the promise of tomorrow. And so, Zuri's reign began, not as a ruler who sought to control, but as a leader who sought to serve, to unite, and to guide her people into a new dawn. A dawn of peace, of balance, and of hope.